In Psalm 46, 8 and 9, we continue to examine the prophecies. Of course, Jesus did not fulfill the prophecy completely at his first appearance, for the promised peace is still in our future. Isaiah 42, 1 through 6 records, "This is my servant, Jesus. I strengthen him. This is my chosen one. I delight in him. I have put my spirit on him. He will bring justice to the nations. He will not cry out or shout or make his voice heard in the streets. He will not break a bruised reed, and he will not put out a smoldering wick. He will faithfully bring justice. He will not grow weak or be discouraged until he has established justice on the earth. The islands will wait for his instruction." This is what God Yahweh says, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it and life to those who walk in it. I, Jehovah, have called you for a righteous purpose, and I will hold you by your hand. I will keep you and appoint you to be a covenant for the people and a light to the nations. Now, in one of my notes, I wrote that certain Christian groups do not hold to a 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ on earth, but it does not exclude them from salvation. The given passages in Revelation can only make sense by a dispensational interpretation. We read in Revelation 20 and verse 2, "He seized the dragon, that old serpent who is the devil, Satan, and bound him in chains for 1,000 years." So Satan is bound for 1,000 years, and peace comes to planet Earth as Christ sits on his throne in Jerusalem and metes out justice. Revelation 20 and verse 3 reads, "The angel threw him in a bottomless pit, which he then shut and locked, so Satan could not deceive the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were finished. Afterwards, he must be released for a little while." Some teach that Satan is already incarcerated, but holds mafia-style meetings from prison and with demons to give them direction on plans for disruption. We are faced with a verse that says Satan will be incarcerated for 1,000 years, so that he could not deceive the nations anymore. But then what happens? Well, he'll be released for a while. It seems obvious that God has a plan that he is still working on. Revelation 20 and verse 4 reads, "Then I saw thrones and the people sitting on them who had been given authority to judge. And I saw souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony about Jesus and for proclaiming the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or his statue, nor accepted his mark on their foreheads or their hands. Then they all came to life again, and they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years." If this were not a reference to the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ, why do these eternal saintly individuals only get to reign with him for 1,000 years? What happens to them then? Verse 5 helps with seeing the whole plan of God. Revelation 20 and verse 5. "The rest of the dead did not come back to life until the 1,000 years had ended." The passage refers to the second resurrection. The first resurrection is a church which occurred with those caught up with Christ in the clouds. The second are those who did not take part in the first resurrection when Christ came to claim his bride. This second group remained in the ground or on earth until the final judgment known as the Great White Throne Judgment. Revelation 20 and verse 6 reads, "Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. For them the second death holds no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years." So during this 1,000-year reign, the resurrected saints will become priests and administrators of God. Why would God need priests in heaven? He doesn't. Apart from Christ, the high priest, the saints will be brought back to earth to minister to the nations, continuing to lead them and to lead as many as possible to Christ. For Christ is still in the soul-saving business. He's not willing for any to perish. Then we read of Satan's release at the end of the millennial reign of Christ, just prior to the Great White Throne Judgment in Revelation 20, verses 7 through 10. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out and deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for a battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. We read in chapter 20, verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne judgment and him who was seated on it. Earth and sky fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. Let me ask you a question. Will you be with Jesus in the New Jerusalem? Salvation, your salvation, is only a prayer away.